There is more on the ballot next week than simply elected officials. In the city of San Francisco, a controversial ballot measure has some of America's biggest titans spending millions and telling each other off. Prop C is a local measure that would raise business taxes 0.5% on companies making $50 million in annual revenue to help fund housing and homeless services. It is sparking big debates among some of America's most powerful CEOs. Twitter and Square CEO Jack Dorsey sounded off on Twitter, writing, quote, "We're happy to pay our taxes. We just want to be treated fairly with respect to our peer companies, many of whom are 2 to 10 times larger than us. Otherwise, we don't know how to practically grow in this city." Joining me now, Recode editor-at-large Kara Swisher. Kara, walk me through this. 0.5% tax doesn't sound like much, but what is Jack Dorsey saying? He would pay way more than other CEOs?
Yeah, it's the way these revenues are figured. And so companies like Square, he's not talking about Twitter, which is his other company he's running, but Square, which is a payments company, and Stripe and others who have been against this, would pay more percentage-wise given how their revenue is figured. And so they want to not pay more than, say, Salesforce does. And so it's just a debate over how much taxes you pay, pretty much, between these companies.
Are they saying we would support Prop C if it was adjusted, so we wouldn't be paying more than, let's say, Mark Benioff, or they're simply saying, no, don't raise my taxes?
Well, no, I think it's the former. But I think the issue is what responsibility tech has for the massive homeless issue in San Francisco, which is, I don't know if you've been there recently, Stephanie, but it's really out of control and really depressing and sad and tragic given how much wealth there is in the city, largely from the tech companies which have come in and they've jacked up housing prices. People want to live in the city. And so it's a real problem around housing, around what to do about this, how much money we should pay for this. And so it becomes a big issue. And so I think the question is who's responsible for it and who should pay for it, and that's really where we are.
Well, what seems somewhat absurd is how much these CEOs and companies are spending sort of on publicity right now to push this thing one way or another. Imagine if they spent it just helping the homeless. I want to share what Mark Benioff of Salesforce told The Guardian. He said, when it comes to this Proposition C, it's the same two buckets. You're either for the homeless or you're for yourself. I mean, that's a bold statement, but is it fair?
Well, I think he's, Mark, he likes to put things in those kind of stark terms because he's trying to sell something, which is that we should pass Proposition C. Interestingly, he was initially against it. We wrote a story in Recode and then changed his mind after studying it a little bit. I think his issue, and I think he's right, that things are very we're at a stage we've got to do something about it. What's interesting here is the mayor is not for Proposition C because she's a new mayor, and she doesn't think the accountability of the spending is worrisome to her, like where it goes and what to do about it. And since there's no easy solutions, especially in a city like San Francisco, which is not going to throw the homeless out, which other cities do. It's a big question of how you spend this money, how much money you should spend it on. If you should focus on housing, if you should focus on drug issues, because obviously drug addiction is an enormous part of this problem. It's so complicated in how the money should be spent. There's a lot of questions on how to deal with something in this kinder way that San Francisco wants to deal with it.
Well, if not voting for Prop C, those CEOs out there like Jack Dorsey who don't want to vote for it, are they acknowledging some responsibility? Have they offered an alternate solutions? When I look at those tents, when I think about the explosion of wealth in the tech community and how it's changed San Francisco, I got to think they have some responsibility here, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the question is we have also issues around this NIMBY and YIMBY thing, which is a building. Like certain people don't want buildings done. There's a very low density in San Francisco, and so there's an opposition to building with more density. I mean, it's not just a problem for the homeless. It's a problem for working people, firemen, nurses, things like that, into keeping the city into what's happening is it's bifurcating into the very rich with these beautiful golden towers like Twitter and Square and others, and they have these beautiful cafeterias and everything else, and they don't go down to the street level. And the homeless, the street life has changed so dramatically in a very short amount of time, and it's everywhere in the city. Where I live and where I live, it didn't used to have so much problem, and now it's really quite. You can't walk through the streets without seeing it. And so I think the issue is how do you create a civil city that is enjoyable to live in, and at the same time is kind to its lowest citizens or its most, the most abject citizens, and at the same time get tech companies which have benefited from being in San Francisco to pay their fair share. And so I think they have a civic responsibility, 100%, and they've got to think harder about solutions than fighting these things.
Well, we're asking our political leaders to come together.
Yeah.
Maybe we could ask those tech CEOs who know each other, who socialize with one another, come together on this thing.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.